So yesterday we talked about the COVID hellscape that Florida has become, sort of almost like as a feature of how Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has handled the COVID situation there, really flouting, not flaunting, flouting all conventional wisdom and public health guidelines almost from the very beginning of the pandemic. Now, we also have these other Republicans who they've been vaccinated, and if asked, they'll say go and get vaccinated. But for the most part, throughout the pandemic, they've played the freedom and liberty game and mostly sucked up to President Donald Trump. And one such example is Republican Senator from representing the state of South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham has now tested positive for COVID-19, and the timing of that positive test suggests that because of a boat ride he went on Senator Joe Manchin's boat, it may even be a sort of mini super spreader event. So let's first look at what exactly is going on. Axios reporting Senator Lindsey Graham tests positive for COVID-19. Senator Lindsey said yesterday he tested positive despite being vaccinated. Graham emphasized that the mildness of his symptoms is due to being vaccinated. If he had been unvaccinated, his symptoms would be far worse, he said. That's his speculation, but certainly reasonable thing to think. It appears Graham may have exposed a number of other senators to the virus after he attended a weekend get-together hosted by Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, on the latter's houseboat, CNN reports. Senator Manchin is fully vaccinated and following CDC guidelines for those exposed to a COVID-positive individual. Senators Mark Kelly, Jackie Rosen were also at the bipartisan gathering and are now following CDC guidelines for persons exposed. Senators Catherine Cortez Masto, John Thune, and Chris Coons, all of whom are fully vaccinated, also attended the boat gathering. Thune has already received his test results and tested negative for COVID. Senate Democrats have gone back to holding virtual meetings in light of the news of Graham's positive test. So I haven't really thought about Lindsey Graham for some time, but remember that crazy situation where he refused to be COVID tested before a debate with, I believe it was Jamie Harrison, who was running against him for the Senate in 2020. And so they basically installed a plastic shield around Lindsey Graham. Sometimes you'll see at big concerts, the drummer will have a plastic shield so that the drumming doesn't get picked up by the microphones of other instruments and people on stage. They did the equivalent, but with Lindsey, it was a COVID glass, a plexiglass or plastic barrier because he didn't want to be tested. So the point here is Lindsey Graham has been relatively clear over the last 2 weeks, including now with his positive test. Thanks to being vaccinated, this is probably less serious than it otherwise would have been. Go and get vaccinated. It's important to be vaccinated. But for basically the totality of 2020, he sucked up to Trump and insisted Trump was doing a good job on COVID, despite Trump's job on COVID being one of the worst in the world, particularly for what we would call one of the wealthier countries. Refused to be tested as part of his freedom and all of this other stuff. And now he may have been involved in a potential mini spreader event. Now, again, the senators on Joe Manchin's boat Saturday were, of course, Joe Manchin himself, Mark Kelly, Chris Coons, John Thune. I mentioned Jackie Rosen, Senator Cantwell from Washington, and Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada, and hopefully all of them will test negative. So there's been a really interesting, at this point, it's really depressing, actually, that this is the way it is. But signal and the absence of signal both are being computed the same way by the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers. So you would think, oh, okay, Lindsey tested positive despite being vaccinated, and his symptoms are mild. So that should lead people to say, I should get vaccinated so that if I test positive, my symptoms will be mild. The problem is that you'll have some people in his base who will say, oh, he was vaccinated and tested positive, therefore the vaccine doesn't work. That would be one incorrect interpretation of what happened here. And they'll say, so I won't get vaccinated because it didn't prevent Lindsey from testing positive. The other one is, well, he tested positive and it's mild. So therefore, I don't have to go and get vaccinated, ignoring the reality that there's a good chance, we don't know for sure, but there's a good chance that Lindsey's case is milder, and hopefully it remains milder because he was vaccinated. So to you and me, we would say this is the virtue of the vaccines working. Lindsey is, I don't know, he must be around between 65 and 70. I would guess 67, something like that. He is at a higher chance of a more serious case. He says it's like a cold right now. It's mild and he's vaccinated. So this is the virtue of getting vaccinated. Other people will simply find in that what they want. Either you don't need a vaccine against something that's mild, or you don't need a vaccine that doesn't work because he tested positive despite being vaccinated. So unfortunately, it's not going to be the big boon that you and I might hope. Now, hopefully he recovers and then he encourages people to get vaccinated, and at least some of them listen and understand that this change we've seen from people like, Mitch McConnell claims he's been for the vaccine all along. He got vaccinated. He hasn't been loudly for the vaccine all along. Fox News, everybody turning pro-vaccine now. The reason, in part, we know that the Trump administration early didn't really do that much about COVID is they saw it mostly affecting Democratic blue cities. New York City, Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles, etc. And so we know because of the conversations between Jared Kushner and Trump, they just weren't worrying about it that much because it was mostly affecting their political opponents, adversaries, enemies, or whatever the case may be. Now it is a very different situation. Now the number one COVID hellscape in the country is Florida, with often 20 or 30% of the entire country's cases are happening in Florida each day. Hospitalizations, record in Florida, over 10,000, highest of the entire pandemic. COVID case rates growing twice as quickly on average in red counties that voted Trump versus blue counties that voted Biden. So they realize now they are the ones at risk of losing voters because of that political reality. That's why they're changing their perspective. Hopefully, Lindsey testing positive, Phil Valentine, the radio host who was anti-vax, saying, get vaccinated, I'm now on a ventilator. Hopefully this gets people vaccinated. But unfortunately, I think for many of the anti-vaxxers, they will see this and say, oh, this is more reason not to get vaccinated. Let's be honest, most healthy snack bars are not exciting like my live streams. And that's why you should check out our sponsor, Monk Pack Keto Nut and Seed Bars are sweet and delicious, soft and chewy with a big satisfying crunch. But each bar has just 1 gram of sugar, 2 to 3 net carbs, and just 150 calories. So it's great for someone on a keto or low carb diet, or even if you just want a tasty, sweet snack without the sugar. Monk Pack Keto Nut and Seed Bars come in great flavors like sea salt dark chocolate, caramel sea salt, or caramel, you choose, and peanut butter dark chocolate. I always have a box of these ready to go in my pantry, which is easy when you do the optional monthly subscription, which also saves you 10%. If you have a sweet tooth, this is the way to indulge without the guilt, whether it's for breakfast or in the car or after a workout. Go to monkpack.com. The link is under this video and you'll save 20% when you use code PACMAN at checkout.